What better time to discuss the political and economic state of our world with the coming of our not-so-new president? Am I right?
Dude, oh my God, can we talk about, the political and economic state of the world right now?
Actually, hold that thought, because I think we have more important matters to discuss today. Michelle Obama famously recalls in her memoir Becoming, "I was becoming known, and I was becoming known for being someone's wife, and as someone involved with politics, which made it doubly and triply weird." Amidst all the surveillance and scrutiny that these women were put under, they were still able to remain graceful despite it all. For many of these women, fashion served as a way to express themselves, and for some was an extension of their husband's political agendas. Today, we'll go ahead and examine the evolution of these women's fashion throughout the course of our history. Also, hello there, cool cats. My name is Melania. Welcome if you are new here, and let's get on with the video. One of the first leading ladies of the United States is our founding mother, Martha Washington, wife to, of course, George Washington. For Martha, she was pretty accustomed to wearing only the finest English fabrics, jewelry, and footwear, and she actually got this from the fortune of her first husband, who tragically died, leaving her with all of his estates and managing all of his businesses. But after capturing the heart of our founding father, she wore an eye-catching pair of royal purple slippers with sparkly buckles on her wedding day. Though the color naturally faded over time, turning into a light lavender, historian Patricia Brady did remark that these shoes were almost like the Manolo Blahniks of her time. So she was definitely on trend and that it girl. So to speak. When her husband came into office as the first official president of the United States in 1789, they allotted about $600 to $800 a year spending on just their clothing alone. Though they were able to strike a pretty healthy balance of understanding what it meant to dress for their newfound roles as political figures, while also understanding not to be perceived as being too self-indulgent to the American people. And followed by Miss Martha Washington was Abigail Adams. Under her husband's presidency, John Adams, his term actually gave way to the two political party system that we Americans know today. Of course, back in this time, there was the Federalists versus the Democratic and Republican Party, with John Adams as a Federalist and Thomas Jefferson in the other party. And one of the issues dividing these two parties was the French Revolution. And aligning herself with her husband's belief, it became a political statement for her to not wear French fashion in protest. While many ladies of this time strove to get the latest fashion from Paris, Abigail Adams stood strong in her stance against it. Wife to James Madison, Dolly Madison was one of the first ladies to really embrace her role, as she was known for hosting these very extravagant events at the White House. With such a hospitable nature, she was very well adored for her fabulous taste in fashion, and having a $25,000 annual salary for her wardrobe alone, she enlisted the help of her loved ones as well as foreign envoys to source out only the best dresses and accessories in France. And one modern rendering created by an artist revealed what her crimson red velvet dress might have looked like back in her time. Her most favorite accessory was her turban that she proudly wore throughout the course of her life up until her timely end. Mary Todd Lincoln, wife to Abraham Lincoln, had some of the most fashionable dresses, and she can credit that to her very talented seamstress, Elizabeth Keckley. Keckley was actually born a slave in Virginia, but she was able to build a very successful dressmaking business. Keckley learned how to sew from the family that owned her and would raise enough money up until she had enough to buy her and her son's freedom. After moving to Washington, D.C., she created dresses for the wives of the political elite and would go on to make 15 to 16 dresses for Mary every season. Standing at roughly 5 feet tall, she had her dresses custom made for her, and they were estimated to cost about $2,000 each, which gained her the nickname the Madam and Hellcat among White House staff for her frequent overspending. For this evening dress, dating all the way back to 1863, she constructed what looks like a pale yellow or beige dress featuring black stripes running down the dress with purple flowers scattered throughout. Made from a more silk taffeta, the skirt is wide and pleated. She also accessorized the dress with gloves, a corsage, a headpiece, and a bouquet of flowers. She also wore a matching pearl necklace, bracelet, and earrings. And it's a good thing too that these two worked together, as Mary Lincoln wasn't actually somebody that a lot of people within Washington society respected, mainly because of the fact that they believed she was uncultured, and so to make up for it, she really tried to only wear the best clothing and hosted lavish gatherings. When Keckley met her, she describes her as being confident and self-possessed, and confidence always gives grace. What's said to have been Mary's inauguration dress was also a showstopper piece. With tons of ruffles and a florets pattern, she again accessorizes with what appears to be the same exact pieces worn from her earlier look. The only difference is that her corsage has gotten longer and trails down to the midline of her skirt. As for Caroline Harrison, she was deeply devoted to her husband Benjamin Harrison's political ideas, and she expressed this through her choice of attire. For her inaugural dress, she made a deliberate request to have the dress crafted in the United States, aligning herself with her husband's vision of a more prosperous America. With silk produced locally by the Logan Silk Company, she embraced the symbolism behind her decisions. She also enlisted Indiana artist Mary Williamson to create a brocaded silk pattern that honored her husband's grandfather, with its design featuring bur oak tree leaves. The lavish, decorative style perfectly embodied the Victorian era's penchant for opulence and embellishment. Now here we are at the turn of the 20th century with Helen Taft. Helen can actually be credited for the conservation and preservation of the inaugural ball gown for future first ladies. And she was one of the first ever to donate her 1909 inaugural gown. Hers featured an ivory empire waist dress, now faded to a soft buttery hue and richly embellished with beads. On the Inauguration Day parade, she can be seen wearing a wide-brimmed hat and what looks like some sheer fabric attached onto the hat that has swept over her face. Helen was also famously known for her hats, where she wore these very large, extravagant styles, many of which featured these beautifully detailed florals and ribbons. Among them, my favorite probably has to be this really shaggy hat that really complements the hanging fringe that is seen on her sleeve. She definitely set the trend with her very bold style, as updo hairstyles and hats were a very massive fad in the early 20th century. Next up, we have Grace Coolidge, who was also heavily regarded as one of the well-dressed first ladies before there was Jackie Kennedy. Known for shopping at Swanky Shops, the shopping district along Connecticut Avenue, she rarely wore the same outfit twice, especially when it came to her evening gowns. She had a really lean and boyish frame, which actually made her the most ideal candidate for the flapper fashion that was very popular during the Roaring 20s. As we can see, she wore these drop waist flapper dresses that were short, but of course not too short, and quite the rebellious spirit. Reportedly, her husband did not like it when she wore slacks, drove a car, or tried speaking to the press. And as an athletic enthusiast, she was an early adopter for modern sportswear, as she was very fond of baseball, hiking, and writing. Nonetheless, she still wore very vibrant colors like red and was very beloved by the public, as she had an immense amount of charisma and was easily able to make friends with just about anybody. And Grace is even named in Vanity Fair's Hall of Fame in June 1927, where they remarked, "She is the first lady of the land and the wife of the President of the United States, because she is one of the best liked and most charming hostess in Washington." For Eleanor Roosevelt, she was was America's longest lasting first lady, as her husband FDR was one of the only presidents to serve 4 terms, namely because of the fact that during this time there was of course the Great Depression and World War II that was happening. For Eleanor Roosevelt, she was a fairly simple woman and preferred elegant, timeless styles that she could wear time and time again. For her husband's inauguration, she opted to wear this blue silk crepe dress fashioned with a leaf and floral pattern. It also featured detachable long sleeves along with a belt buckle and rhinestones made by American designer Sally Milgram. And serving for so long, they celebrated about 4 inaugurations, although the second and third inauguration were technically canceled, first being in 1937 and then in 1941, namely because of the events that I mentioned earlier. They celebrated nonetheless, but opted for a smaller celebration. In 1937, she again wore a Sally Milgram design, this time opting for an ivory colored satin gown. She also wore this pale mauve gown where she struts down Bailey Hall, featuring a brooch in the middle paired alongside a belt and a shawl. Her 1941 look also featured an ivory satin gown that had a pretty dramatic train and gorgeous detailing along her bust and sleeves. And finally, in 1945, she wore this pink Arnold Constable gown with rhinestone sheer sleeves. Using her elevated position as a first lady, she struck a deal with Arnold Constable, fellow New York retailer, where in exchange for posing in a couple pictures with his pieces on and distributing them to the press, she was able to get a pretty good discount. Being a first lady for 8 years, Mamie Eisenhower always strove to appear very young and stylish, where she was remembered saying, "I hate old lady clothes and I shall never wear them." Oftentimes, she wore sleeveless clothing, as this was actually her husband's favorite style. Pink, it seems, was also one of her favorite colors, as she adorns this very lovely gown for the inaugural ball, accessorized with gloves, pearl jewelry, and a sparkly clutch. She shines radiant in this look. Designed by Nettie Rosenstein, she embroidered the gown with over 2,000 rhinestones. Again, she wore that same designer for Dwight D. Eisenhower's second inauguration with an off-the-shoulder light yellow dress with embroidered pearls, crystal drops, and translucent topaz beadwork. Again, she pairs it with opulent pieces of pearl and long satin gloves. And on her regular outings, she loved her hats and her printed day dresses. And in both presidential ceremonies in 1953 and 1957, she also fabulously wore these amazing fur coats. And as for everybody's favorite fashionable first lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, and also the inspiration for the look today, despite her husband having a tragically short presidency, Jacqueline Kennedy was perhaps one of the most influential first ladies, as no one else exhibited as much style, youth, and culture within the White House. And she proclaimed that she hoped to position the White House as a showcase of American art and history. Oleg Cassini, a very famous costume and fashion designer who was known for dressing famous starlets, became Jackie's unofficial Secretary of Style. And for her husband's inauguration, she wore a dress crafted by Cassini, wearing a matching beige A-line dress and coat accessorized with a pillbox hat and a muff. These massive oversized buttons really created a very dramatic edge to her coat. And for her inaugural gown, she actually shared a sketch with Ethel Frankow of Burdoff Custom Salon, and the result was this graceful off-white sleeveless gown made of silk chiffon with a flowing chiffon overlay embroidered in silver thread. Among my favorite looks that she wore was actually this matching leopard print set that she actually wore when she was going to church with her husband. And you can definitely see why the paparazzi loved her, as she stunned with every look that left you wanting more of what she's going to wear next. As for Pat Nixon, by the time that she became First Lady, she was already familiar with the role, as she served her time as Second Lady. At her husband's 1969 inauguration, she wore a fuchsia coat by J. Sarnoff paired with a fur stole and hat. As for the ball, she wore a yellow silk satin gown by Karen Stark with the dress beaded right where the dress cinched at her waist. She also wore a crop jacket that was beaded all throughout. And 4 years later, for Nixon's second inauguration, she wore a blue-green coat with a fur collar and turquoise gown by Adele Simpson for the gala. Pat was also known to make a political statement when it came to her clothes as well. For instance, when the couple first visited in China in 1972, she opted to wear this long red wool coat. Symbolized as good luck in China, many people were impressed by her red coat accompanied with her warmness that contrasts the pretty dark clothing that the Chinese people were wearing at the time. President Nixon had actually been the first U.S. president to visit China, with the trip ending the 25-year-long non-communication between the two. Ji Huan, the vice president for the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, says that Pat Nixon's choice of clothing will stay forever in Chinese people's memories and the history of China-US relations. And having a Hollywood background herself, Nancy Reagan knew a thing or two about glitz and glamour, wearing lavish ball gowns from high-end designers such as Adolfo Bill Blass and James Galanos. Her signature color was dubbed Reagan Red. This term has led many people to speculate that she is one of the reasons why red is the official color for the Republican Party. For Ronald Reagan's swearing in 1981, she wore a matching red coat and hat designed by Adolfo with some black leather gloves. Her inauguration dress was a one-shoulder beaded dress with a lace overlay by James Galanos. And in 1985, she decided to opt for those same two designers again for the same two events. Adolfo crafted a blue suit and hat for her, accessorized with gold jewelry and button earrings for her husband's second inauguration. As for her ballroom look, Galanos designed an Art Deco inspired white and silver dress with beadwork that reportedly took more than 300 hours. She also wore a jacket of the same design over it. For Hillary Clinton's style, hers was marked with matching suits and dresses as First Lady. An accessory that she was actually known for was her headband that she wore, but for the swearing of her husband Bill, she wore a checkered red suit by Arkansas designer Connie Falls, which was a nod to her husband's home state. Supporting Sarah Phillips, another Arkansas-based designer, she wore this rich purple beaded dress with sheer sleeves that truly made her shine that night. And a couple years later, in 1997, for the second inauguration, she wore this salmon pink dress and coat with this beautifully exaggerated collar flop accessorized with the brooch. And for the inaugural ball, she wore an Oscar de la Renta dress with a high neck and ivory metallics, and a look unlike anything we've ever seen from any of our leading ladies. I absolutely love this black dress that she wore for the 1993 state dinner. This dress was designed by Donna Karan and features this very black high neck and cutouts where her shoulders are, and I just think this is such a sexy piece, which we don't see often, but it's sexy in a tasteful way, I think. As for Laura Bush, her style can pretty much be characterized as very simple and minimal and almost conservative for the 8 years that she served as the First Lady. Just as Hillary Clinton before her, she pretty much stuck to tailored suits and dresses, but obviously knew how to glam it up when it came to the inauguration. And during her husband's swearing, she wore a blue coat made by Michael Faircloth, followed by a very dazzling red long sleeve gown with crystal embroidering. And in 2005, for her husband's second inauguration, she also went for an Oscar de la Renta piece with this clean all white look and wore this very sparkly white dress for the ball. Now, as for the one and only Michelle Obama, she stepped into First Lady. You could say it was a breath of fresh air, namely because I guess you could say it was a bit lackluster when it came to Laura Bush's style. But this time around, Michelle was definitely more of a risk taker when it came to her fashion and was not afraid at all of bold patterns and proudly supported American designers such as Jason Wu, Ralph Lauren, and Jonathan Simkai. She was also a pretty proud patron of J. Crew, as she famously wore it for her appearance on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. This topic was brought up by Leno when he asked her what her campaign budget was for her wardrobe, alluding to the $150,000 that Sarah Palin has when it came to her campaign budget. And in response, Michelle just said, J. Crew. And what's funny about it is that J. Crew representatives actually had no idea that she was gonna go ahead and wear their clothing on the show. But of course, they were quick to capitalize off of it. Marketers went ahead and bought Michelle Obama keywords on Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo as they built a website specifically promoting the exact pieces that she wore, and actually told call center representatives how to handle queries asking about Mrs. Obama's fashion. And throughout the course of her time as First Lady, she would still continue to support the brand and wear their clothing, although elevating it in a very elegant way, but of course would go on to wear more luxury high-end brands. For instance, she dazzled in this gold Versace gown for a state dinner, this Vera Wang dress to greet the Chinese president and his wife, and this Gucci gown in December of 2016. As for Barack Obama's first inauguration, she wore a lemongrass Isabel Toledo wool and lace dress paired with a jacket and some olive green J. Crew gloves. And I think she just looks so ethereal in this white dress designed for her for the inaugural ball by Jason Wu, and this actually helped his career a lot as it catapulted his career in fashion because of her. As for 2013, for the second inauguration, she opted for more of a sophisticated and sleek look from Thom Browne, wearing a navy silk dress and coat. And once again, she decided to wear a Jason Wu original for the inaugural ball, as she was a vision in red in a chiffon halter dress. As for Melania Trump's style, you could say that her fashion was nothing short of controversial, namely because of the very questionable army green jacket that had "I really don't care" written on the back when she went to visit border kids in Texas. When a rep of the First Lady was asked for a comment of this clothing choice, she simply responded, "It's a jacket. There's no hidden message. After today's visit to Texas, I hope the media isn't going to choose to focus on her wardrobe." Interesting choice to say the least. But anyways, much of her style can be characterized with these very sharp silhouettes, and on occasion she boldly wears these very vibrant colors, and of course you can't forget that smoldering look of hers. It's just so funny. During her husband's inauguration, she opted to wear this Ralph Lauren blue cashmere ensemble, and as for the ball, a white silk off-the-shoulder gown with a ribbon tied at the waist by Hervé Pierre. And undoubtedly, she also does pretty well in some pantsuit. Among her looks, she really looks pretty suave in this linen beige pantsuit set, as well as a hat that showcased more of an androgynous look when she was on her tour in Egypt. And finally, we're caught up to where we are now with Jill Biden, as she's mainly appeared to wear very sophisticated dresses. In 2021, she wore a blue coat created by designer Alexandra O'Neill, custom made with embroidered Swarovski crystals. It added a nice little sparkle that shined ever so slightly in the sun. Sadly, there was no inaugural ball during this time, as we were amidst the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that concludes the fashion of the First Ladies. There's no sure way of knowing the sort of changes that will arise with Trump's presidency underway, but here's the hope of a better tomorrow. Thanks for being here, cool cats.